Generic yet polite salutations to one and all. This is Trent Mayfair, the itinerant LARPer, coming to you from yet another hotel room. Boy, that's eating into my budget, but quite honestly, it has just gotten way too cold to sleep out in a tent. So yeah, this past weekend I went to the last Bastion over in southern Georgia, and it was the same group that I've been LARPing with for the last number of weekends. I really just needed to see a good group of friends that I knew. Also, Mythic Adventures did not ever respond to me, and I heard some really horrendous things that made me kind of second guess my decision to go down there. So I headed back up north a little bit. And because it was the same group of people, the same rule book, the same staff people, etc., I decided to do something a little bit different for this video, and instead of just my thoughts and opinions, since this was a Game Zero, I asked the GM if she would consent to an interview that I could post for everybody to see, and here it is. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Leah Honecker, the operator and owner of The Last Bastion, the LARP that I went to this past weekend. And she has graciously agreed to come on to the show with me and answer any number of questions about running a Game Zero. The reason that we are currently doing this on the internet as opposed to face is because we had a bit of a storm issue down where I am, and I cannot get out of my hotel room. So Leah has very graciously agreed to get her internet going so that we can actually have this little conversation here. So Leah, first off, thank you for coming on to the show, I guess we could call it at this point. and being willing to explain this, and especially thank you for talking to all of your staff members about the questions that I have for you, and getting the entire group's answers.
Yeah, for sure.
So thank you so much. Let's just jump right into it here. The first question, of course, has to be, what was your impetus for starting your own LARP, and what is driving you to keep it going?
Okay, yeah. So Fables Untold is the company that oversees Last Bastion. And so three of us got together and we decided that we kind of wanted to start a LARP for North Florida and South Georgia. It's an area that's pretty underserved. So we did work to kind of like feel things out with where people were at and everything. And there wasn't really much of like a fantasy style setting in this area. And we also didn't have any kind of like radical player trust systems going in the area, and quite frankly in Florida at all. And so that was something that we really wanted to bring to the area, kind of introduce to people down here. So
Okay. Interesting. And does the fact that you basically got the same group as who I've been playing with for the last 3 weekends, and not really as many people from the local area, like, do you find that daunting, or is that encouraging?
it's encouraging. It helps too for us because they know the system very well. We actually, unfortunately, our first game coincided with another major LARP in Florida. So our aim is for our next game to not coincide. So we should get more of the people who don't know as much about this system during our next event, which is also exciting.
Very nice. Now, the rule book that you used for your game, you basically took the Garden of Destiny's After the End rule systems, and you tweaked them a little bit. You definitely made them your own. But what was the impetus to use those systems instead of starting one from scratch, or just attending those games?
Right. So yeah, as a staff, we'd already all attended Gods and ATE for quite a while, and we'd gotten to experience their systems. When we were talking about systems and such like that, we were talking about designing our own system initially. And we decided that we really liked what Gods and ATE had going on because to us, it helped prevent a lot of out-of-play drama, to be honest, that PvP settings often lead to. Gods and ATE's rule system are very much PvE, where everybody kind of works together and collaborates to face a bigger issue. And so that was something that really drew us to it. In addition to the fact that during our early planning stage, Gods approached me to become staff on their game. So back in July, Gods had approached me to join their staff. And I was like, well, I don't mind joining, but we are starting our own game too. So I want you to be aware of that. And their staff was pretty gracious and offered us as much help as basically we needed. And that kind of helped us get off of the ground a lot quicker than if we had focused on like developing our own system and having to do alpha test and all of that. In the end, we only ended up doing one alpha test, and now we're in kind of our beta year 0. So we were able to get content out a lot quicker using basically a pre-made system that had already been tested by multiple games.
Very true, very true. And knowing the world that you were creating for it, it was very easy for you to tweak it for that world.
Right.
So do you think that you're going to be ending up with like a partnership with Gods or ATE and maybe becoming like another sister LARP, as it were, for them?
Yeah. We've definitely talked about it a little bit. The current issue is that we as the staff don't have as much to offer them. So that probably will be something that's discussed in greater detail come year 1, when we're not as like desperate to have some money coming in from people attending.
Very true, but don't sell yourself short. You have a wonderful story going on.
Thank you. Yeah, the Gods and ATE have a whole sister policy that is published on their websites. So there's a lot there on that too about working with another LARP on creating a game and kind of doing the staff benefits to going to another game and things like that, which is great.
Absolutely. And also you're all in the same area and you're sharing a player base, so it kind of makes sense for you all to work together on things, and especially just to make sure that like you're not repeating each other or anything like that at the bare minimum.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely some different kind of crossovers in the settings, but we've definitely worked to not be the same exact setting. For instance, ATE is very steampunk, cyberpunk, Western, and for instance, Last Bastion has a Western realm in it, but it is very much more goblins and elves and orcs and all of that good stuff in a Western style setting. So a little bit of a difference.
Absolutely. And what made you, while we bring that up, what made you want to aim for a world where anybody could play anything as opposed to having a more cohesive theme? Like, no, we are a fantasy LARP. No, we are a Weird West LARP. No, we are an Apocalypse LARP. You opted more for we're a nexus point where, a lot of different worlds are kind of dumping into this one world. So there's going to be just about anything for anyone. Like,
right.
What made you want to do that?
So Gods has this going on already, this multi-genre type of multi-world setting. And we all really enjoyed it. It was the first time I had ever experienced a system like that. And I've lived in Florida my whole life. Unfortunately, for a lot of Floridians, that game is just too far north for them. As is for me, it's about a 6.5 to 7 hour drive to go to their game.
Yeah.
And I live in North Florida. But yeah, so we had kind of talked about like different realms type of settings and things like that. And we all kind of got stuck because we're like, well, I really want to do this and I really want to do this. And so we were like, let's kind of meet in the middle and let's kind of do all of them. So we kind of proceeded forward with the ideas that we liked the most, and then some of them kind of got squashed together into one realm when they were too close to being the same type of thing. Obviously, a lot of our staff writes. They run tabletop games. They all have different creative ideas that they want to express in a LARP. And so Last Bastion has kind of been a combination of all of that together.
Excellent. It, it definitely shows how cohesive your staff are, that they could bring such disparate worlds together and actually make it work and have it be fun for all and everybody engaged in all the stories. Um, but this also does bring us to the next question of what were the actual steps you had to take to start up your LARP?
Right. So we had all had experience either staffing or running a LARP before. Um, and like we each had our own different kind of focus. Like I'd done a lot of logistical and rules type stuff before. Kenneth is a very strong writer. He also did rules as well. And Seth actually picked up a game for a while where he was the sole director of the game. So we all kind of took our experience and kind of comboed it together. And so basically just making sure that we all wanted to do this. We all wanted to dedicate the time to this was the first major hurdle. But because you got to think about it in the long term. Like you kind of want to look at what your plans are for the next few years, essentially, especially if it's something that you're going to invest your time and your money into, and you want it to be a campaign style thing versus like a one shot. And so we started planning really in May, and by August we sought and paid for our LLC. I would have to say for that whole process, choosing a name for the LLC was probably the hardest part.
Well,
And
also followed very shortly by what should we have for lunch today?
then, right. Well, and like, so we chose a name for the LLC, and then we were like, so what are we going to call our LARP? So naming is a whole other thing because everything sounds good and then everything sounds bad at the same time.
Right.
And then, yeah, so then it's a lot of paperwork stuff in the beginning, getting your federal tax identification, setting up a bank account. You want to start figuring out how to like recruit players, and you got to start writing content to do that. Basically, you've got to get them engaged and not leave them hanging with, well, is this LARP ever going to actually start? So it's good to kind of keep it quiet until you are ready to really proceed forward. Don't put your foot out there and not be ready for the reception, essentially.
Okay.
So
That definitely makes sense. What about like insurance and stuff? Like, what made you choose Georgia over Florida? Like, how much of a hassle was insurance? What type of insurance did you need to get to run a LARP?
so our insurance basically is essentially that the LLC protects the individual people within the group.
Right.
Different sites require different insurance requirements. Sometimes you can get away with just like a event insurance. There is now LARP insurance out there as well, which is an interesting new field. The Georgia state parks and nor the Florida state parks so far have requested actual insurance information. So that is something to know, is that when you go to more private parks, they will probably ask you some kind of insurance information. The Georgia state parks, so Florida state parks don't really have as much cabin and lodging style stuff. And they also don't really have AC or heat, most of them, which is very uncomfortable in Florida. The Georgia state parks, yeah. The Georgia state parks, there's a few more sites that actually have heat or AC. A lot of them, though, are very old. They're, probably 40 to 70 years old at a lot of them. So it's kind of finding a good site is part of the initial hurdle. For instance, like I sent out probably 30 emails to different sites across North Florida and South Georgia. Our focus area has been pretty much in the Douglas, Okefenokee type of area where it's a lot of woods. It's very remote. There's quite a few private sites, for instance, out that way. There's also a lot of state parks. And so that was really important to us. And then like deciding on where our player base was going to be traveling from. And so we tried to meet in the middle, and essentially we landed in the same area, the Okefenokee Douglas area, where that is about 4.5 hours from Tampa. It's about 4.5 hours from Atlanta, and then 2.5 from Tallahassee and 2.5 from St. Augustine. And so that was kind of our golden spot.
No,
We didn't want to
Savannah and a couple other large population
right.
areas around there.
Right. And yeah, we didn't want to have to end up traveling 2.5 hours from where we live to get to the site. Like no more than that, really, because
Right.
you think about it, you got to take time off from work, you got to get there and set up and all of that. So that was kind of how we chose the site. We definitely didn't expect as many players as we got at our first game, and so we went with a much smaller site, trying to play it safe. And yeah, so we're getting a much larger site for our next event.
Excellent. Excellent. I'm glad to hear it.
Yeah.
Of all the problems to have, that is probably one of the best ones.
Right. Exactly.
Um, so now the sticky question, and feel free to, refuse to answer this question. I totally understand. But, ballpark figure, like, what was the actual cost of starting up your own LARP?
So yeah, I would say the initial paperwork stuff, like creating the LLC and all the logistical things, at least for the state of Florida, the cost was about $150. And so that's just the really bare minimum that you have to do initially. But as you get closer to running your first event, you're going to spend a lot more money on creating weapons, buying costuming, buying stuff to store that costuming in, book the site. Yeah. Yeah. And like the site fees, that most of them want at least a one-night deposit when you book. And most of that is going to be $300 to $400 most likely. And so it's a lot, and it's a lot of your own time. It's a lot of your own time making sure that your stuff is proofread and rereading over it and writing everything. And so I mean, honestly, overall, I'd probably say $1,500 is kind of like the bare minimum that you want to start. Mainly because, like I said, you got to book all this stuff, and then if you're going to try and book more than one event, essentially every other night that you book, they're going to want every other event that you book, they're going to want another security deposit. And so it quickly adds up, especially if you're trying to book for a whole season and get the dates out as early as possible, which we're still struggling with. And so it's definitely something that you want a little bit of either a Kickstarter, or if you've saved up money, or if you have a plan basically to pay those fees that cost. Of course, you can go with not having costuming and not having makeup and try and make that stuff up further into the LARP, but it's a hand toss. We really wanted to provide all of that from the get-go, so we made sure that we had all that, and plus we were getting all of this together right at the end of the Halloween season, which was great because everything was on sale.
Oh yes, a LARPer's best time of the year, the day after Halloween.
Exactly. Yeah, I found myself asking Spirit Halloween how much for a cardboard chip. So, yes.
Oh, I just go in and go, yeah, can we just do like a shopping spree or something like that?
Right. Yeah.
So what were your main foci as you went into Game Zero of your LARP?
So yeah, kind of to piggyback off of the like getting the stuff together, we wanted to be organized. We wanted to be professional, essentially. This is a group of friends trying to do an endeavor together, but we're still also a business. We've all put our own personal money into it. People are paying us for something, and they're expecting something in return. And so our goal as directors and staff and everything like that is to provide the best game that we can. And so we did a lot of like taking in feedback on different rules things, reading over things, doing Q&As, try and make sure that we were, our players were understanding what we were giving them, and that if they had questions, they could ask us. We wanted to make sure that everything was easily accessible. So we got our website up and we made sure all the links were on there. Anytime anything was updated, we noted that it was updated. And then, so it was a lot of crafting and a lot of content writing before going into event one. We were still working on craft and content projects early Friday before game. So, and then like that kind of leads into this whole system and setting. We really want to focus on the story that the player wants to be told, essentially. And so we reviewed each player's character submission, their backgrounds. We tried to make sure that we had content for most of our people who were able to get one in. in time. We had a few late stragglers, but
Sorry.
but yeah, so we tried to make sure that we had, at least a mod for like people who were like, hey, I really want my character to have this big feels moment, or I want my character to be this really strong fighter. And so bringing in something where like, you get to really express that in your character was something that was important to us. And so we kind of tailored a lot of content to what the players had essentially requested through their background. And then we also had like our larger season plots that we needed to start. So for instance, the one for Last Bastion right now is Death is Missing. And so the players really got to get into that a little bit and kind of figure that out. But yes, we started planning for our first event in early October, and that still continued up and through the weekend. So
Okay.
it's a lot. It's a lot of organization. It's a lot of like making sure that you're not missing people. And then yeah, just making sure that like we put a lot of importance on props and costuming and things like that as well. So we're trying to give a somewhat immersive experience, obviously, as much as you can for Georgia in the sand, but
Yeah, exactly. In the scout cabin,
right,
camper cabin.
right.
Um, so you mentioned before that like this was a group of friends. Like, how did you all how'd you all basically like come to the conclusion that you were going to be able to work together on this project and it wasn't going to be bringing up bad memories and PTSD flashbacks and and like end friendships over disputes between how storylines should go and stuff like that? Like how'd you actually like come to the conclusion of yes, we can do this?
Yeah, having a cohesive staff that can communicate is very important to a LARP. I've definitely seen plenty of LARPs where they don't have that and they don't do well. So
Check some previous videos to find
yeah.
others.
So yeah, I mean, initially there's three of us, and we had all played at games together.
Oh, your audio just dropped out. You're,
Is it working now?
barely. We can barely hear you.
Oh
Oh
no.
no.
Testing?
Okay, we can kind of hear you.
Okay, awesome. I'll try and pull it closer. Maybe that'll help too.
Yeah, well, thank you. Okay, so anyways, you were saying.
Yeah. So Seth, when he was running another game, for instance, Kenneth and I volunteered one weekend with them, and we went over there and helped him do content and kind of organize things. And that was kind of our first, I guess, toe in the water of working together as a staff. We basically went out in October 2018 to help Seth with that. And over the next few months, we kind of all started talking about running a LARP and what was missing in the area. And so we kind of came to this big thing here. And Seth had already had ideas. We had already had ideas. And so we started talking about that. And honestly, the communication is the key. If you are already having issues communicating what your thoughts and ideas are in the very beginning steps, it's not a good sign. And like, so we would list the pros and cons of people that we also wanted to approach later on, because since we started all of this, we've also added 2 more staff members to our overall staff. So we're at 5 now. And so we would go over the pros and cons of those individual people, our experiences with them, and we decided on who we wanted to approach. And so we would kind of do a initial like, hey, are you interested in doing something like this? And then we wanted to do a more formal approach. So that was pretty important to us. Taking on additional staff members can be very daunting because you can be friends with someone and know that they wouldn't be a good person to run a game with. Right. And so it's also a difference being friends with someone and then also working with them in a business style environment where you've got deadlines and you've got to get stuff out and things like that. And then also you just don't want your staff to be too big. You don't want your staff to take up half of your player base, essentially. Also because all of our staff members are full-time NPCs. They do not have player characters, for instance. And so they don't pay to come to game and things like that. And so their entire weekend is dedicated to helping run this LARP. And that's a big undertaking. It's a lot to ask of someone to help with. So yeah, we kind of chose general qualities that we would look for in other staff members, like adaptability, the willingness to help, their creativity, and basically kind of their versatility to some extent. Their versatility in like, what have you done in the past? Where did you come from? What is your experiences been in different settings and different cities and different cultures, essentially. I have a bachelor's degree in anthropology, so that's also very important to me, is having a diverse staff that can meet diverse players' needs, essentially. And so we try to pull people with different perspectives, for instance, when looking at staff.
Definitely makes sense. Definitely makes sense. I noticed that at Garden of Destinies as well, because the diversity of a game really does start with the staff.
Right.
So
I was gonna say, you want the players to have somebody too that they feel comfortable approaching, and that's not always going to be the same person in a staff, basically. So like, you may identify with one staff member more than another, and that means that you're probably going to go to that person if you have any concerns or anything like that, especially while you're at game.
right, absolutely. Or even out of game, just because like that's the person that you kind of made friends with, so like you are more likely friends with them on Facebook before any of the other staff members.
Right.
You have their phone number before any of the other staff members. Like there's a way to get in more direct contact with them sooner, just because you forged that relationship. And I think you'd probably agree with me that forging that relationship is just as much on the administration as it is on the player. It has to go both ways.
Yeah, it's very important. Like, you want to connect with your player base. If you don't connect with your player base, then there's a lot of basically misunderstandings that can occur. It's worth noting too that you have to be careful with that as well, because you don't want the power of proximity. You don't want your closest best friends to seem like they're getting all of the best content, and it may not even be something that you recognize consciously. It could be something that you're doing subconsciously, or it could just be the way things appear, but other players will pick up on it. And so you have to be careful that like you're essentially not handing too much over to your best and closest friends.
Right. You have to maintain that impartiality when you are in that kind of a position of power.
Right, exactly.
Like if you're handing out a magic item to one person, everybody has to be able to have the opportunity as well.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Like, my goal in a weekend is not to run 10 mods for one person. My goal is to run 10 mods for very different people.
Right. 10 mods for 20 different people.
Yeah, exactly.
Because people should be grouping up. It's a social activity.
Right, exactly.
So let's see. Oh wow, we've already been going for like 30 minutes now. Oh my. So well, fortunately we've come to the last question. So how mad would a woodchuck get if a pink koala bear named Ishtar came and chucked all the wood before the woodchuck could? Theo, I told you to stop doing that.
I think that's something that should be investigated. You should probably devote some downtimes and research into that.
Are there even koala bears in your world? And are they pink?
I mean, so we do have Mariglade, so there is a chance.
Oh yeah, I didn't even think about that one. Leah, thank you so much for this. I've truly appreciated it. All my viewers appreciate it as well. Thank you so much for being here with us tonight.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry about the internet troubles, but
no, all good, all good. It's coming from both sides. So
Florida.
Yeah. Well, we're in two different parts of Florida, so yeah.
Yeah.
But yeah. So again, thank you so much, and thank you so much for a wonderful game experience. I really, truly had a blast.
Thank you. Yeah, we're glad you could make it.
So, and you have a great night and happy gaming.
You too.
Bye.
Bye.
Well, I do hope that you enjoyed that, and I hope that you join me this coming weekend when I head to Dystopia Rising in Florida. See you there.